Urgent question, Mr. Stephen Twigg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for International Development to make a statement on the impact of the escalation of Saudi Arabia's blockade on the humanitarian situation in Yemen.
Minister of State Burt, a busy bee indeed. Minister Burt.
Thank you very much. I think in a first answer to the Right Honourable Gentleman, it's fairly clear where the Secretary of State is, and therefore, with apologise for her being on a visit to Africa, let me answer the question. Yemen is the world's largest humanitarian crisis. 21 million people in Yemen are in need of humanitarian assistance. Nearly 10 million are in need of immediate help to support or sustain life. As the third largest humanitarian donor to Yemen and the second largest donor to the UN appeal, the UK is already leading the world's response to the crisis in Yemen. Our funding of £155 million this year will provide enough food for 1.8 million people for at least a month, nutrition support for 1.7 million people, and clean water and sanitation for an expected 1.2 million people. As penholder on Yemen at the United Nations Security Council, the UK was responsible for a presidential statement earlier this year that called on all parties to provide safe, rapid and unhindered access for humanitarian supplies and personnel to all affected governorates in Yemen. We continue to call on all parties to the conflict to respect the statement and take action accordingly. As my Right Honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, set out in his statement on Sunday the 5th of November, the United Kingdom condemns the attempted missile strike on Riyadh this Saturday in the strongest terms. The ongoing ballistic missile attacks by Houthi Saleh forces against Saudi Arabia threaten regional security and prolong the conflict. The latest attack deliberately targeted a civilian area. We therefore recognise the coalition's concern about illicit flows of weapons to the Houthis in direct contravention of UN Security Council Resolution 2216. We also recognise that following Saturday night's attack, Saudi Arabia needs to take urgent measures to stem the flow of weapons into Yemen. At the same time, it is vital that the country remains open to humanitarian and commercial access. The Saudi-led coalition has confirmed that they will take into account the provision of humanitarian supplies. We're encouraging them to ensure that humanitarian commercial supplies and access to continue, and our ambassador is actively making this case directly to the Saudi authorities on these points. Finally, Mr. Speaker, there remains a desperate need for a political solution to the Yemen conflict to help end the suffering of the Yemeni people, to counter destabilising interference and end attacks upon neighbouring countries. It's vital this situation does not escalate further. The United Kingdom will continue to work towards a political settlement which supports regional stability and calls upon all countries in the region to support that goal. We will also continue to support our partners in the region to protect themselves against security threats.
Mr. Stephen Twigg.
Mr. Speaker, can I join the Minister in condemning the missile strike on Riyadh by the Houthis, which has been described by Human Rights Watch as most likely a war crime? We have seen alleged violations of international humanitarian law on all sides of this conflict. Can the Minister update the House on progress towards the independent investigation that was agreed at the recent UN Human Rights Council? Can I welcome what the Minister has said about seeking to bring all parties back to the table in Geneva, and can he tell us more about what progress is being made towards securing a ceasefire so a political solution can be achieved? The scale of the humanitarian crisis in Yemen is truly appalling. The cholera outbreak is considered the worst on record, and as the Minister said, the UN estimates that over 20 million Yemenis are in need of humanitarian assistance, with 7 million on the brink of famine. The Saudi-led coalition has now intensified its blockade. With 90% of Yemen's food coming in imports, this risks making the dire humanitarian situation even worse. Does he agree with me that this blockade could constitute unlawful collective punishment of the people of Yemen? He mentioned the representations that our ambassador is making. Can I ask what representations he has made, and indeed the Foreign Secretary has made, to Saudi Arabia to have the blockade lifted as soon as possible? Can I, Mr. Speaker, urge the Minister, urge the government to do everything in their power to get this inhumane blockade lifted?
Minister of State.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman and the Chair of the International Development Select Committee for raising this. Let me try and take matters in order. Firstly, in relation to reaction to the incident, we shouldn't in any way mistake the intent of the direction of this particular missile or where it came from. An Iranian-supplied missile to the Houthis deliberately fired towards Riyadh airport, with all the implications that there might be, that the Saudis would take immediate steps to try and safeguard their country and try and make sure that the flow of missiles into Yemen was further checked is not unreasonable. At the same time, as he makes clear, it's vital that humanitarian commercial access continues. We've consistently urged the coalition to take all reasonable steps to allow and facilitate rapid and safe access for humanitarian assistance and essential commercial imports of food and fuel. And we are actively engaged with the coalition and those responsible for humanitarian support in Yemen to try and find a way which enables the blockade not to affect the humanitarian access, but still, of course, safeguard the important rights of those in Saudi Arabia who may be under attack. I spoke to the Saudi minister on Saturday, shortly before the attack took place. I intend to speak to him again very shortly, either today or tomorrow. And of course, the ambassador since Saturday night has been actively engaged in Riyadh in trying to deal with these issues. So two further things. In relation to cholera and malnutrition, again, we try to be at the forefront of international efforts in both those topics to provide support to UN agencies who are actively involved, and will continue to do so. But importantly, in relation to the political negotiations, I'm very well aware of what's happening there. We had a meeting in New York recently. There's looking to be another ministerial meeting very shortly, where we're trying to find a pathway through to the descaling of the conflict. But it isn't just about the coalition forces, it is about the Houthis and those who support them, and whether they have any willingness to take regard of the appalling condition of the people of Yemen that has been caused by their actions in starting the conflict and usurping a legitimate elected government.